Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment contains the relevant provisions of the Reef Assassin Act, which would attack the lionfish problem that is very pervasive in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. Lionfish are an invasive species that are decimating our reef fish. One lionfish can consume up to 65 juvenile reef fish in one sitting. A female lionfish can release up to as many as 10 million eggs over the course of one lifetime. This legislation would allow our resource to be used to protect our resource by creating an incentive for fishers who harvest the lionfish and then turn them in to participating states who would choose on a volunteer program to be able to issue tags for one prized coveted reef fish, a triggerfish, a gag grouper, or a red snapper, in the event that 100 lionfish tails were produced. Anyone who goes and slays 100 lionfish certainly has saved far more than one of our prized reef fish, and that's why it's my belief that this amendment makes a great deal of sense for our environment and also for the overall health of our fisheries. Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to yield 1 minute to my colleague from Florida, Mr. Soto, the Democratic lead on the Reef Assassin Act.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this good bipartisan amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz. Lionfish are disrupting Florida's natural ecosystem. Lionfish are taking away prey from our native fish stocks and prey on reef fish that perform essential ecological services on the reefs. This amendment would give an incentive for fishermen to remove the lionfish by awarding a tag for desired reef fish in return for every 100 lionfish tails turned in. That is quite the bounty. The amendment will promote cooperation between local, state, and federal governments to eradicate lionfish from Florida waters. This amendment is derived from a bill from which I am a co-sponsor, and I thank the gentleman from Florida for offering the amendment and urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I reserve.
Does the gentleman reserve? Who seeks time in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition, although I don't tend to oppose the amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the gentleman from Florida for bringing this issue up. The lionfish is certainly, according to many reports, been a species that is causing an adverse impact to red snapper. The solution that he proposes here is a solution whereby states could submit a modified or a new exempted fisheries permit where they could provide for additional, on top of their existing allocation, access to red snapper in exchange for harvesting a certain number of lionfish species which are predators to the red snapper. As folks will see, there's a lot of handwriting on this amendment. We did sit back and make some changes to this, so Mr. Chairman, there is an excellent chance that there's some imperfections here, but I do want to thank the gentleman for working with us on this. I want to thank my friend from Florida and from California for working with us on this as well. It's likely that we're going to need some additional work on this as we move forward. There's some enforcement issues, there's science issues, there's introduction of a new mechanism that causes some significant concern in the form of tags in some cases. But I want to thank the gentleman from Florida for raising this issue, for working to ensure that we continue to have access to red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico, and looking forward to working with my friend from Florida as well as the folks across the aisle on perfecting this as we move through the conference committee. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman for Louisiana for offering his insight and his views. It is certainly my hope that any animal which is delicious, like the lionfish, but that is also invasive and destructive to our environment, would be one that we would be able to work together across the aisle to harvest out of existence so that we protect our environment and protect our coveted reef fish. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment as modified offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment as modified is agreed to.